Good morning, all. It's good to see you, and it's good to be in a very warm place. So cold. As we're all getting settled in here, we get our doors shut. I'll mention that we left off last week talking about a really interesting character, I would say. His name is Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. And it would probably be fair to say this guy is quite literally, it seems, wickedness in the flesh. He is a complete mess. Unfortunately, we didn't get through talking with him, and I knew we wouldn't. There's so much. There's 45 verses in chapter 11 of Daniel. If you haven't opened to there, please do so already. Daniel chapter 11, and we left off with verse 28, if I'm not mistaken, last time. I do want to refresh, going back to verse 21, just a little bit about this character. So we're talking about these kings leading from the Persian kingdom on into the Grecian kingdom. And then the Grecian kingdom splits into how many pieces? 4. Very good. All right. And to 4 of the pieces, I'm going to show you the map again here in just a little bit. I will hold off for a moment on that. And then we continue to progress, and we're going to cover all of the intertestamental period, which is really cool. Because, I'm guilty of this probably more than anybody. And think and say, well, there are 400 years of silence between the testaments. Yeah, as far as narrated history there are, but really there isn't in prophecy. In prophecy, all of this is covered in the book of Daniel, and specifically in one chapter here in the 11th. So let's do just a little bit of review of this crazy character, verses 21 through 35 of Daniel 11. And in his place shall arise a vile person, and that's going to be Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. He reigns from 175 to 163 BC. So we're almost 200 years into the period of silence. If you're interested in more of this and you were unable to be with us last week, I would encourage you, please check on our church YouTube page. It is now updated with all of our Daniel Bible classes. I appreciate my bride who's been working so hard since we got our new computer in. All that's updated. She's getting through all of our other classes, of course, and also hopefully our sermons here before long from that period we missed. And then it'll be back to, they'll be just right on track each week at the beginning of each week if you'd like to keep up with those. All right, so we're at the chronology of 175 to 163 BC. Antiochus IV Epiphanes is going to be reigning. In his place shall arise a vile person, that is he, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty. So it doesn't just calmly, naturally pass hands from dad to son necessarily, who's ruler. But with this one, he shall come in peaceably. I'm not saying it's going to be violent when he does so, but he's going to seize the kingdom by intrigue. People are going to be like, oh, that's interesting. We haven't had a ruler who presented ideas like these before, at least not in a very, very long time. Verse 22, with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. Now, that's not a reference to Jesus. We're not there yet, although he's certainly that in a greater sense. This seems to be referring to a guy by the name of Onias III, who was the final righteous high priest of the Mosaic covenant. And then you're going to end up with people like Caiaphas and Annas, guys who are just a disaster. Verse 23, and after the league, or this alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. No, not a politician. I thought they always carried through on their word. Well, this guy, he's the exception to this. So he's going to preach this great cause, and then he's going to be someone different whenever he gets into power. For he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He's going to have influence in the Syrian government, and this is going to help him to get the foothold that he wants. He shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches. He's going to seize the kingdom by intrigue. So I don't know if this is a fairly novel concept back then, but there'll be this potential ruler who comes along, and he says, if you had a guy like me, I would give you free A, B, C, and D. What? The guy's going to give us all this free stuff? or even the spoils from war, not take it all or mostly for himself and share with us? We've never seen this game plan before, have we? All right, so he continues on. And the end of verse 24, the prophet that is, he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. Okay, anybody recall the Antiochus family and where they've been ruling, the general territory, the area? King of the north, that is he. Okay, Syria is a big part of it, not limited to, right? But a big part of. This is what's referred to in the yellow goldish up there. That is the Seleucid Empire, all right? That's the king of the north. And the king of the south, boy, that country's been around for a long time, hasn't it? Influencing the world. Egypt's still around, and this is the Ptolemaic Empire down in the area of Egypt. When it's mentioned, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south, king of the north, Seleucids, versus the king of the south, the Ptolemies, with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a great, very great, and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. So what we know is Antiochus IV, he moves against Egypt in 170 BC against Ptolemy VI Philometor. So when you hear Ptolemy, it's not the same guy. There's a whole bunch of them. You know, last week we were talking about Cleopatra. She's the queen of the Nile, correct? All right, queen in the south. We're still going to be talking about her hundreds of years later here in just a moment. It's not the same one. She would be too old. There are actually 7 Cleopatras. So a lot of times these names, they just continue. Family names get passed down. Keep that in mind. Just like Antiochus, he's not the first. He's the 4th, okay? So, in verse 25, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. So he comes down against the king of the south. The king of the south says, oh, you want to fight? Let's go. But king of the south's not going to be successful. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. I mentioned to you last week that Ptolemy's advisors gave him some bad advice. They have him to flee Alexandria, of course in Egypt, by sea, and then he gets found by Antiochus. Verse 27, both these king's hearts shall be bent on evil. Well, you wouldn't expect that from 2 rulers, would you? Maybe from one, but not for both. Nothing's changed through the years. Antiochus pretends to back Philometor against his brother who's been proclaimed king. So you have this kind of civil dispute going on in the country of Egypt. And he says, hey, I'm behind you. And he's kind of playing both sides. And he's really not looking to be a help there. Euergetes II is the one who's been proclaimed king. And Antiochus says, hey, I'm on your side, Philometor. I don't believe in your brother. Not exactly true. But their lies and their work together shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. I love that remark. You have the powers of earth trying to do everything that they're going to do to make their will happen, and God says, Daniel, it doesn't matter what they do and what they try. What I want is still going to be done. Verse 28, while returning to his land, that's Antiochus, with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. Now, en route to his homeland, Antiochus Epiphanes, he marches with this strong force against God's people at Jerusalem. And there he enters the temple and he carries off the sacred furniture. He strips off all the gold plating from the front of the temple. He seizes the silver, gold, precious vessels, whatever secret treasures he can find. And where we left off was with this. Who tried that in the past? Nebuchadnezzar. God brought him low. He gets exalted back up, but not with that mindset, not until he humbles himself. And God, the God of heaven, the only true God, Nebuchadnezzar then kind of seems to recognize toward the end, very graciously restores to him his health, his kingdom, and his power. That's a merciful God, isn't it? To do such a thing with a guy like Nebuchadnezzar who had insulted him in such a terrible way. He's probably not going to succeed. It's almost like a theme of history, isn't it? You battle against the power of the God of heaven and you find out you really had no power all along. Remember Pilate with Jesus? Why aren't you talking to me? Don't you know the power that I hold over you? Jesus' response, you don't have any power. I mean, he doesn't say it quite as disrespectfully as that sounds, but he says you would have no power at all unless heaven had granted it to you. So let's just set one thing straight, sir. All right, so we're going to move on now from verse 28 into newer territory. Verse 29. At the appointed time, he, that's Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. This occurs in 168 BC. Verse 30, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him. These are invaders from the west. If you can tell on the map, of course, again, the Seleucid Empire. This is over what Antiochus IV Epiphanes is reigning, the yellowish. And so if you'll go just a little bit in the Mediterranean Sea to the west, there's Cyprus. I wouldn't doubt what you're right there, Roy. I'm right with you. Again, with Hebrew, a lot of times there's very figurative language. Bible in general, but especially in Hebrew, figurative language being used. Cyprus could just be used as a figure from the west. Absolutely, good point. Thank you for that clarification. For ships from Cyprus, or invaders from the west, shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage. He's mad. And so when he would come back from west, okay, or his attention from back west to east, well, the first thing after the west there in the Mediterranean, that's God's holy land. And so he comes there and he's angry. Well, he's going to show us how powerful he is. He's going to whip up on his subjects, which are God's people. He'll return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. I don't know if you are like I am. When I first read that, I had to go through it a few times like, wait a minute, what's he saying there? So he's showing regard for the people of Israel, because it sounds like he's doing harm to the people of Israel, which would be a contradiction of what's stated. So if you go back, I had to do this a few times, it starts to make sense. He comes back and he shows regard, concern, you might even say support, for those who forsake the holy covenant. So if you forsake the covenant of God, what does that say about you? You are an enemy. And does that make a little bit more sense? He's supporting and he's encouraging those who are in disobedience toward God. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, that makes a lot more sense, because he's doing harm to God's people. These people who should be living for God are not. And so he's actually abating the enemies of the Lord who are supposed to be living as his people. And that does seem to make a lot more sense. Verse 31. And forces shall be mustered by him. They shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Would seem to be probably a reference to the temple, maybe just Jerusalem generally, but certainly specifically the temple, as we're about to find out. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices. Think about this. When people under this old system are doing their best in line with the law, now we know some aren't too, probably more like many are not, most, But there are some who are trying to live for the Lord and keep their relationship with Him in proper accord, and He comes in and He does away with the system that helps people stay in line with God. Exactly. It would exactly be like that. For those who didn't hear, it'd be like someone, say the government, all right, forbidding us to take place in communing with Jesus and one another on the first day of the week. That's a big deal. I'm going to guess God's probably aware of that. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. This isn't the first time that we've heard this in Daniel. I do want to make a suggestion to you, and that is when we encounter this in the 9th chapter of Daniel, we were talking about a time frame that's like within Jesus' lifespan. We're dealing with a time frame right here that's about 170 BC. Well, I say Jesus' lifespan. Technically, it's after He leaves the earth, but it's in that era that He lives on the earth and His apostles, and for Him just shortly after. This is not the same time period right here. This is about 170 BC. I do not believe we're talking about the same event, even though Daniel does refer to the abomination of desolation. So we know in about AD 70, the abomination of desolation is clearly stated by the gospel writer Luke to be what? The destruction of Jerusalem, which takes place with what unit? The Roman army. And we know that makes a lot of sense because abomination means what is detested. Desolation is what makes desolate or destroys, empty. All right? What is hated that destroys? AD 70, that's the Roman army. So it's the same expression right here, but of a time period that's basically right at 200 years prior. What is the abomination of desolation here? Think about the terms. What is an abomination is what is despised. What is a desolation or makes desolate that is hated. I think this might be what's hated by God that destroys His people. Any guesses as to what this might be? Yes. So He encourages and in fact sets up the worship of a false god. And I think that's the reference here is to an idol. Don't know how familiar you are with the apocryphal writings. Not the apocalyptic writings, but the apocryphal. Apocalyptic is biblical. Apocryphal is not. That's extra biblical. And there's, depends on how you count them. I've seen 13, 17, 22 different books that supposedly fit into this intertestamental period, some of which people have thought through the years should be recognized as inspired by God. In brevity, I just want to state this. Jesus and His apostles recognized the same books of the Old Testament, 39 for us, it was 22 for them, because they didn't have first and second of everything like we do. We've talked before about how Ruth was actually originally attached to Judges as one book. It was slivered off for ease of access and reading of a scroll because the Jews liked to at the time of the feast. It wasn't originally a separate book. So you have things like that. But the same writings that we recognize as inspired in the Old Testament, 39 books, they saw as inspired. To them it was only 22. But all the same writings and nothing more did they recognize as inspired. The law, the prophets, and the Psalms, Jesus would say, in Luke 24, the history bears that out. Now, we can have conversations about historical value and all those things, but biblically and historically, Old Testament, it's an open shut case as far as what was recognized as inspired in Old Testament writings. That being said, the time between the Testaments, there are, you'll hear 13, 17, 22, all these different writings that some recognize as inspired. Jesus and His apostles didn't, so I don't either. However, I will say this, that there are some that are of more historical value than others. First Maccabees is one of those works that is most historically reliable for this intertestamental period. I'm not saying it's flawless, nor am I suggesting that it's inspired by God. Now you get into the other writings of the Maccabees, not quite as historically accurate. But the first one is pretty solid. And in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, it's clearly stated that it was recognized that the abomination of desolation set up in the temple by Antiochus IV Epiphanes was an idol. And in particular, as has been suggested to us by Roy, probably a reference to the idol of Zeus that was set up. He did. He did. And I believe that's foretold right here in Daniel 11. All right, so let's carry on in verse 32 of Daniel 11. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, with flattery. Great swelling words of emptiness you might find elsewhere in the Bible. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. This could be speaking of Hasidim, which is a pious sect that arose to try to preserve the law during this period. Verse 33, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. So you still have people around who love the Lord. There's always a remnant and are standing for the truth of God. And they're doing their best to try to spread this message and to stand up for what's right. But those old pesky Greeks, they take advantage of this situation because they're aware of the religion of these people. And there was a fanatical refusal on the part of a number of these devout men to fight on the Sabbath day. And so the Greeks would especially wage conflict on them. Guess what day? On the Sabbath day. And they would slaughter a number of them. At least hundreds were slain. Verse 34. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue. Second time we've encountered this word. Oh, this is interesting. Now here it seems to be more of a zealous endeavor and for good. But Roy, right here, I believe the reference seems to be to that charismatic leader of whom you spoke, the brilliant military tactician, Judas Maccabee. His name, by the way, Maccabee literally means the hammer. That's pretty cool. This is the intertestamental Thor. Okay? He's bringing down the thunder. Judas Maccabee was able to relieve some of the pressure on the Jews by a series of battlefield triumphs over these huge opposing forces. He, however, was never able to completely rescue his people from those Syrian Greeks, nor was he able to stem the tide of paganism in Judea. So he's trying to purify the corrupted land and religion of his people. And the guy, I mean, for how small the forces are against the huge numbers, he has a lot of success, but he's not able to overthrow this huge effort that's at work. Some Jews hypocritically pretended to support Judas, who's very popular, but their hearts inclined toward Hellenization, which is that Grecian influence over the Hebrew people. Verse 35, and some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So there's still work going on trying to clean up the mess among God's people. God with his servants to refine them, purify them. The terminology is, what do you think the time of the end? Until the time of the end. What would the time of the end be, probably? Especially in Daniel. Not the end of the world, although God will do that till the end. The end of the Jewish state. There you go. So what he's saying is we're at, a little bit ago, about 170-ish, getting down to about 160 BC. We're making progress toward what important date? AD 70, when Jerusalem and God's people are completely going to face the wrath of the Lord and his righteous punishment. Okay, so this makes a lot of sense. Keep your spot right here. If you don't mind, please turn to Malachi chapter 2. Of course, the last Old Testament book as it's arranged and very likely written. Malachi, the 2nd chapter, and we're going to start reading in the last verse of chapter 2, verse 17. And we'll cross over into chapter 3 just a little bit. Malachi 2:17. See if this sounds familiar. You have wearied the Lord with your words, but you say, how have we wearied him? By saying, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them. After all, they are his people, right? What's it matter what their character is? That's their attitude. Or by asking, hey, we're being wronged. Where's the God of justice? Why isn't he intervening? Chapter 3, verse 1. Behold, God speaking, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, and they will bring offerings in righteousness to the Lord. Now I ask you to skip down into verse 18, end of chapter 3. Then once more you shall see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve him. So going back to our text of Daniel 11, we just read in verse 35, some of those of understanding shall fall for the purposes of refining them and purifying them and making them white until the time of the end. What end? The end of the Mosaic covenant, the end of the Jewish state. And it's Jesus who's going to come onto the scene, be preceded by his messenger that's going to anticipate this final time of reformation among the Jews before all of this takes place. And the prophets are in complete agreement with one another about it. I will go so far as to suggest, many times like we know concerning Daniel, they don't understand everything that they're speaking and they're writing. But how amazing is it that these details just fall perfectly in line with one another? It's almost like it's another mind that's working behind them to make sure of the accuracy. Roy? Oh, it is. Thank you. I appreciate the advertisement for this morning. An example of the colors of the Bible. White. It's not the first one we're going to study, but yeah, we're going to get to that one. Thank you, Roy. Very good. I want to mention this one also about the time. The time's going to happen, the determined time we have in our memory verse, which is right next, if you want to refresh that really quickly. Daniel 11:36. So if you want to look at that, that might help. But time is important to God. Perfect timing, determined time, the purpose time. Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption as God's children. There's nothing that's an accident with time when it comes to God, which is almost a little paradoxical, because the one to whom time means nothing, in a sense, handles time perfectly. But I guess you would expect that from a perfect God. Okay, so let's go back to our text, Daniel chapter 11. Daniel 11, and who would like to say for us our memory verse 36? I'm just going to tell you right now. This is the memory verse of all memory verses, I feel like. It took so long, so much practice to get this. There's just something about this one. I think I have it down, but I'd rather not say it. I want one of you two, please. I'm tired of saying it. Anyone want to do Daniel 11:36? Yes. Please, Roy. Excellent, Roy. Whew. Did you think it was a little bit of a challenge, that one too? Did you think that one was a little challenging too? I thought so too. Well, apparently that was my dilemma then, maybe, or at least a part of it. Yeah. Well, thank you for doing it. I appreciate that. There's so much that's contained in this single verse. All right, let's quickly try to break this down. Then the king. It almost sounds like we're continuing to talk about the same ruler, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. I'm going to suggest to you I don't believe that's the case. I will recognize it's possible, but there's some of these details that almost don't seem to fit his life just exactly right, but they certainly do in other ones. And also, I think it could make some sense going back to verse 35. It almost seems like there's a little transition here in our discussion. Some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, make them white, until the time of the end, meaning some time is going to progress from what we've been talking about to what we're perhaps going to begin discussing in verse 36. It's going to be another king of the north, but I don't think it's the same one that we've been discussing, because there is seemingly some elapse in verse 35 of time. And by the way, we're told here about the refining in verse 35 and the purifying. How and when, chronologically, does this take place? We know God himself says, I am coming, but before I come, I'm going to send somebody. Who? Who's that? John the Baptist, the messenger of the covenant. So it's in this time period of the lifespan of Jesus and of John the Baptist of which we're speaking. And if we fast forward a little bit, we get to an important historical figure in the early life of both of these children, very early life. A guy by the name of Herod the Great. This is like the terrible kind of great. He reigned from 40 to 4 BC. And what happens in 4 BC at the end of Herod's reign? What's one of his final acts? Killed all the. Why would he kill a whole bunch of babies and all the boys 2 years and below? Why would he do that not only in one town but also in a whole vicinity? Who's Jesus? He's trying to kill Jesus, and he's the Messiah. Is he anything beyond that? He's a king. What is he anything more than that? What is he? He's a ruler. What is he? Anything beyond? Huh? Okay. And because he's the Son of God, he's what? God himself. Trying to kill God, he kills all these little babies. Okay. Keep that in mind as we go through and we read this. This king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. He thinks he's the reason, the sole reason the world exists. He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper, have a lot of success, till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. Listen to this in verse 37. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. So you hear that, and what do you think? Doesn't care about the desire of women. Sound like he's a homosexual, wouldn't it? Now, you're right, Justin. He says it's a pretty common practice in the culture in those days for this among rulers, and not just with males, but a lot of times boys is what it is. Yeah, it's pedophilia in addition to that. Disgusting. Okay, now that's one possibility, all right? It sounds that way. Let me ask you this. What do women desire? All the guys are like, please. I haven't figured it out yet. Okay. Let me give it a suggestion and just to speed things up. Here's the direction I'm going. I can tell you in my house right now, there's a lot of adoration going on, but none more than one. And there's a special connection there. Mothers and their children. God made mothers in a very special way. And then he made dads. So no, but really though, you know how it is, a mother and her children. There is a very special bond there. You know, we often talk about the Mama Grizzly reaction to things. You know, I mean, you can have the kindest, gentlest, sweetest. I can think of a number of ladies in this congregation, but I wouldn't want to cross one of their children. They might kill me. I mean, it's one of those. I mean, it's, you know, that's the connection that mothers have with their children. And I'm going to suggest to you that this may very well be the reference right here. That he has no regard for the God of his fathers, nor for the desire of women. Doesn't care about children and babies, not like women do. Now, that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? What does this guy do? Kills all of the male children, 2 years and under, in this town and in all the surrounding areas. What kind of human being could possibly do that? Only one. The one who doesn't care at all about the God who created him. No regard for life, and the love of women, the care that they have for their children, he doesn't have any inkling of that. Doesn't matter to him one bit. For he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. There does seem to be some indication from history that Herod the Great had connections to idolatry, and even though he was a Jew and should have this relationship with the God of Scripture, doesn't really seem to have any concern about that. Verse 39, thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. Verse 40, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. All right, let me show you on our second map. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to go backward for that. So don't forget, the king of the south is going to be from Egypt, right? And these are different rulers. I mean, we're, going forward 150 years approximately from where we just were. So these are different rulers, but these crowns just keep getting passed down. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. Okay, so by this point, though, the king of the north has been the Seleucid Empire under the divided Grecian rule, but things have changed by now. We had the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, or Medo-Persians if you prefer, and the Grecians. Who comes next? And this is prophesied multiple times we've encountered in the book of Daniel. Who's on the scene by this point? Rome. Rome has now absorbed so much of this territory and is rapidly expanding. So the king of the north now, it's no longer Greece, divided Greece. It's now the Roman Empire. The king of the south attack Herod the Great. The king of the north attacks Herod the Great. They come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, many ships. And he shall enter the country, overwhelm them, and pass through. So initially, Herod the Great's not in accord with those in the south. But Cleopatra, not the same one. Cleopatra, the seventh and the final of the Cleopatras. Mark Antony and Herod the Great form this alliance. They come together trying to resist this tremendous power that's come onto the scene in Rome. After they capture Syria for the south, the north, which is Rome, launches a full attack against this southern alliance. Verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. It's reported from history that Herod, looking out for number one, was able to save his crown at this time by switching his allegiance. So he's been a part of this alliance in the south, has helped preserve him, and now he realizes, well, we're defeated anyway. So he says, "Oh, Augustus, greatest Caesar. I've always wanted to be a servant of Rome. Thank you, sir." And so he switches over, and he's able then to hang on not only to his life, but also to his power. According to Josephus, Pliny, and others, the Roman Augustus sent an unsuccessful expedition against Edom and Moab at this time. However, Augustus did take possession of the wealth of northern Africa. Libya and Ethiopia were among the countries that submitted to his authority. Verse 42, "He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels," just as history would confirm. Verse 44, "But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many." Does that sound familiar at all? The lifespan of Herod the Great. News from the east that would trouble him. There are these guys that come from the east. Are they dumb? Oh no. They're the wise guys. And they come from the east. "Oh, hey, what have they heard? We hear there's a new king in your land," speaking to the king, "and we've come to worship him." "Oh, a new king, yes. I would like to do the same. Would you mind to give me his GPS coordinates, and then I can go visit him and show him how grateful I am that he's alive, coming into this kingdom and about to take over my power." That would be tremendous. Well, what about a report from the north? We have recorded from history to protect his throne. Herod, of course, he ordered the slaughter of the Bethlehem innocents because of the troubling news from the east. But as far as the north, those reports came in a letter from his son in Rome. The letter reported that Herod's other two sons had written a slanderous letter to Rome about their father. So they're telling the emperor, "Hey, Dad's a nutcase. You need to get rid of him." Well, Herod finds out about this because of his loyal son. And what do you think Herod's recourse would be? He killed his own two sons because of their trying to get rid of their father, which, I don't know if any's in the wrong or both, or, I mean, they're right. He's nuts, okay? Anyway, whatever it is, that's what happens. Verse 45, "And he shall place the tents of his palace between the seas." What are some important seas of the Holy Land? Well, I mean, you got the big one. I'll rule that out. I don't think it's probably the small one. Okay, the Dead Sea, and you do have the big one out to the west. And that's going to be the Sea of Galilee. And then there's old Lake Hula that's no longer there. It was drained because people were tired of the mosquitoes about 50 years ago. Anyway, but you have the Mediterranean Sea to the west and the Dead Sea. All right, the Dead Sea that's found to the east. And what's found between those two? Pretty important place. Jerusalem. Jerusalem. "He shall spread the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him." Herod actually had two palaces in Jerusalem. There's one in the temple area, and then one in the upper city. I want to tell you this as we close, that Josephus describes the terrible end of Herod the Great. He literally rotted away and bodily suffered convulsions. Herod ordered, this is how beloved this ruler was, Herod ordered that Jewish leaders should be executed at the time of his death, his final act of life and as king, in order that there might be mourning at the time of his funeral. He knew not a single person, not even from his family, would be crying. And so he takes some really popular Jewish leaders and has them executed so that people will at least be crying at the time period that he dies, and it will look like someone cared about him. I don't think he would be missed. He's remembered in history, but not in a good way. I want to close on this thought in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2. "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when a wicked man rules, the people groan." Why do people ever get wicked rulers over them anyway? There you go. You get what you ask for, and sometimes it's not even maybe in so many words what you would ask for, but it's what you deserve. Yeah, a people gets the ruler that she deserves. Well, for next time, I know that's not a cheery note on which to end. Let's see if we can get something a little better next week. Daniel chapter 12, as we wrap up this study together. Not super long, only 13 verses, but man, is it packed with incredible information. It should be a real bang finale to our study. Let's memorize verse 4, which is a real key thought of the entire work. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4 is the memory work, all of chapter 12 reading. I'll leave to you, though, if you have just a final remark you'd like to make. Okay, let's take a break. I'm enjoying it.